Welcome to the Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 33. Wow, 33. And today we have an interview with a Jeffersonian scholar, Dr. Garrett Ward Sheldon, part one. Oh, how many parts do we have?
Do you like my Cossack, new Cossack coffee mug, by the way? Anyway,
smooth. How many parts do we have? Two, three? Two. Oh, okay. 2 parts. Okay, so stay tuned. As we promised last week, we have a special treat for you. Part one of a 2-part interview with Professor Garrett Ward Sheldon of the University of Virginia. Wow, wise emeritus. Professor Sheldon has published much throughout his career, but today we focus on his book, The Political Philosophy of Thomas Jefferson, 1991. And today we focus on the political dimension of Thomas Jefferson's political philosophy. Next week, we shall examine Dr. Sheldon's views on Thomas Jefferson and morality and philosophy of education as they relate to his political philosophy. Oh my gosh, these are my favorite topics. I'm so excited. I love this. I love this. So what is the aim of our show besides the fulfillment that I get in learning from you? Nearly all Jeffersonian biographers today take it upon themselves to write of Jefferson's two-facedness. What Jefferson says most often cannot be understood literally. It must be deciphered. His prose must be deconstructed, and so intuitiveness and knack are needed in preference to logical acumen. It is commonplace to call the man a hypocrite and even a contradiction. Peter Onuf writes in The Mind of Thomas Jefferson, "The search for a single definitive real Jefferson is a fool's errand, setting us off on a hopeless search for the kind of knowledge that even or especially elude sophisticated modern in their encounters with each other and themselves." Joseph Ellis in American Sphinx maintains that our contradictory depictions of Jefferson are the result of Jefferson having a capacity to rest comfortably with contradictions. Thus, there appears at the beginning of nearly every Jeffersonian biography some statement of or caveat concerning the difficulty, if not impossibility, of getting to know Jefferson. Jefferson is the problem. We are not. I don't think so. The aim of this show, the real Thomas Jefferson, is to get real about Thomas Jefferson, to revisit and revise the revisionists in the business of deconstructing Jefferson's prose, his letters, addresses, memos, etc. This show then aims to dispel the myth that Jefferson cannot be known because he was, in the words of one scholar, a baffling series of contradictions. Bunkum, I say. Jefferson can be known, and logic, not intuitive and discretionary deconstruction, is the method. I'm Donna Vitek, and this is the Real Thomas Jefferson, episode 33. So now let's get real with Professor Sheldon. Yay! I'm so
glad to have you on, Garrett. Glad to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
thank you. Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure, and to talk about my book, The Political Philosophy of Thomas Jefferson, available now on Amazon and maybe free shipping. But as you know, Mark, this book was published 33 years ago by Johns Hopkins University Press. It was actually written 10 years earlier as my Rutgers doctoral dissertation. But it took 10 years and about 100 rejection letters before it was published by Johns Hopkins University Press. And then it went all over the world. This one book is how I got to lecture at Oxford University, the University of Vienna, Austria, Moscow University, and in Istanbul. And I heard from scholars from India and Eastern Europe. So this book went all over the world, took me all over the world, which tells me that Thomas Jefferson is admired all over the world, except maybe in Charlottesville.
Or the United States.
But he is recognized, as Tocqueville said, right, as the philosopher of American democracy. even the communist dictator of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, admired Thomas Jefferson.
Wow.
So
oh my gosh.
it began as my doctoral dissertation at Rutgers, where they had then 7 professors of political theory covering every period, ancient, medieval, modern, every ism, and it was historical. And so we all studied every perspective. We had academic freedom back then, and we debated and questioned every philosophy. And then most of us doctoral students then picked someone else to write our dissertation on, using all those past philosophers. And the joke at Rutgers was, what is Sheldon going to do with a dissertation on Jefferson? Go to Virginia? Well, that's exactly what I did. And associated with the University of Virginia, Jefferson's University. I wanted to go to Virginia. I wanted to be associated with UVA. I wanted to teach at a small liberal arts college. So I taught at the Branch campus in the town called Wise, Virginia. And I retired 5 years ago. I just reached the biblical age of 70, which is 70. And I'm pleased to talk about Mr. Jefferson.
Oh, I am so glad you are here to bring your expertise. Wow.
Thank you.
And I have a barking dog here. Anyways, I got to read the book and very, very impressed with it. I'm doing a book review of it for Jeff Abbeville Institute. And at the end of the review, I say that anybody's interested in Jefferson's philosophical thinking, it is not only recommended, but required reading. Really, really fine job, Garrett. So I enjoyed reading it. And I think anybody wanting to learn about Jefferson's philosophical thinking, it's a really good place to start.
Oh, I love the political philosophies of that our founders. That's my area that I enjoy learning.
I have another one to recommend. After Johns Hopkins did this, I edited a series of books on the founding for Johns Hopkins and wrote a book on James Madison, the father of the Constitution.
What's that one called?
As Mark knows, I found in both of them several philosophies from the past: classical Greek, especially Aristotle; British liberalism, especially John Locke; as well as Christian ethics, moral sense philosophy, a lot of things. So if you want me to talk about that, I will.
Well, we have a series of questions. Donna, if you could start with the second question.
The second. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh man, I could just, wow. We have to do, maybe we need to do 3 shows.
Well, 2 will be fine. Well, and we can invite Garrett in if he wants to do more. I gave him a standing invitation to come in and join us whenever he wants to.
I'm a civics teacher, so this is my, this is my passion.
Then you would also love to give myself another plug. You can edit this out, but I taught a year-long survey on the history of political theory and wrote the textbook, and it's now called, I just updated it, it's now called The New History of Political Theory, Ancient Greece to the Modern World, and it has all the classics: Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, Cicero, Machiavelli, and right up to the present, Rawls. And you can see a video I did for C-SPAN on that. But
this may sound weird to you, but I almost think when you tease out Jefferson's political philosophy, it's a bit Rawlsian. I don't know if you'd agree with that. I don't think he goes into, he doesn't fish out his views the way Rawls does, obviously the same systematicity, but I think when you fish out Jefferson's views, you get something similar to what Rawls teases out.
I think you're right about that, because there's both a social dimension and an individual dimension. And Jefferson got his social dimension from Aristotle, the classical Greek philosopher, still considered the greatest philosopher in the West. And Aristotle said, man is by nature a social and political animal and has to fulfill his telos by governing, by being a citizen actively. And like the Greek polis, a small community, which Jefferson translated to what he called ward democracy, which every citizen participates in politics. And then his
Well,
theory.
that takes us, if we get right to the first question, Donna, the prickly question, because that's exactly what Garrett's talking about right now. And we want to know what he has to say about classical Republican.
So on the prickly question of the influence of classical republicanism and Lockean liberalism on Jefferson, you offer a view, genealogical, that Jefferson's political philosophy was shaped much by both. His early writings show more the influence of Locke, his later writings of classical republicanism. Can you explain that?
I'll try.
Okay.
But I'm trying to remember what I said 40 years ago. No, as I said, Jefferson's philosophy combines what most scholars consider contradictory. Ancient Greek, classical Greek political theory, especially Aristotle, says that man is by nature a social and political animal, and so must be involved in politics to fulfill his telos, his purpose. And so you get the Greek polis, a small democracy, participatory democracy. And the emphasis is on society, politics, community, whereas John Locke, the British philosopher, natural rights philosophy, emphasizes the individual rights, life, liberty, and property. The government's created just to protect rights. And so it's obvious why you would think having both is contradictory, but I show both historically, and as Mark just said, like Rawls, he combines the two, protecting individual rights to participation to fulfill the social telos of being a citizen.
Now, people might think why scholars have taken this to be, I've written on this as well in my first book on Jefferson, was a collection of philosophical essays. I talk about Jefferson's liberal eudaimonism. Evdaimonia in Greek literally means good God, translated often as happiness or human thriving, which is the same thing that Garrett's doing, is a sense, why do people think these views are contradictory? One, the Lockean liberal view, axiology deals with worth, assumes the primacy of the individual. The classical Republican view assumes the primacy of the state, polis in Greek, whatever you want to call it. So from an axiological perspective, a perspective of what's worth more, right? You get two different answers to the question from the classical perspective and the atomic perspective. One is the individual is privileged. The other says the society. Garrett, Professor Sheldon, is arguing, as I have done, that these need not be seen as contradictory views. I think, and I think you would agree, that you get the Lockean liberal perspective in Jefferson's Declaration and other things, talking about we have equal rights and so forth, all the things that follow. But following Aristotle, Plato, and everybody else, you also, and this is guaranteed by Jefferson's moral sense, we are unflinchingly moral creatures. So in Aristotle's think we are political animals, each is a politikon zoon. So we have to exercise our rights and everything within a political milieu to be fulfilled and happy. They work together. Would you agree with that? The two work together, hand in
hand.
Right,
and they are different if you emphasize one or the other, but they can be compatible, as Jefferson does it. And most of the American founders were Lockean, followers of the 17th century British philosopher John Locke. As I often told my class, Locke is the key to American political theory. Get it? Locke, key. Yeah, by the end, I didn't even get a groan, much less a laugh.
Oh, that's
Donna
great.
will laugh. She'll laugh at anything.
I said that so often, they didn't even groan anymore. But the truth is, every other founder talks about individual rights. Locke says man is by nature free, equal, and independent, with rights of nature, life, liberty, and property. Government is instituted to protect those rights, period. Otherwise, it's a capitalist marketplace. So Jefferson, through his theory of federalism, takes that view of limited government at the national level, and then he takes the view of classical Greek politics at the local level, state, county, and what he called wards. Like literally a small town should be self-governing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another instance of the Lockean element is Jefferson's, and that's the next question, Donna, the Lockean element.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay, on page 73, you write Jefferson's Virginia reforms were to accomplish this by 1, eliminating the oligarchy of concentrated wealth along with its exclusive hold on political activity, and 2, elevating the mass of citizens to economic independence, making them capable and interested in public participation. The reference is, of course, to Thomas Jefferson's natural aristocracy. What sort of reforms did Thomas Jefferson work toward, and why were they needed?
Right. As soon as he wrote the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson, who was a lawyer, set about to reform the Code of Virginia laws, for a republic rather than a colony of Britain. And one of the main British laws from feudalism was primogeniture, which was that the eldest son inherited the entire estate. You couldn't write a will and distribute it to all your children or anyone else. So for Jefferson...
That's why I moved out of Michigan, by the way. I'm a middle child.
Right. And I'm the youngest, so I'm always the baby. But Mr. Jefferson, like Aristotle, another thing about Aristotle is he said, to have a democracy, not only do you have to have a participatory, practicing citizenry, an educated citizenry, but an economically independent citizenry. So you can't have the concentration of the landed wealth in the eldest son. You have to distribute it, which is why Jefferson thought America, which was a nation of farmers, could be a democracy because all the citizens were economically independent. I don't think that holds anymore.
And that was certainly his ideal. He was, and as I've argued in my recent book on Jefferson and History and Liberty, this whole notion, these notions of liberty and equality were horribly radical. And it, when we're talking about equality, not everybody believed in equality of all people. That needed to be explained. What did Jefferson actually mean when he said all people are equal? I get around that by saying we're all equal by virtue of each of us having a moral sense, and equally so. We're certainly not, in Jefferson's view, equal in intelligence. You can't argue that.
No, or virtue. That's the fascinating thing about, I have a section on leadership and Jefferson's theory of the natural aristocracy that fits into his democratic theory. The natural aristocracy, unlike one based on wealth or birth, the natural aristocracy takes those natural qualities and elevates them, and that is wisdom and virtue. So we're elect leaders. Please sit down. I got to sit down when I say this. We elect a wise citizenry will elect leaders who are aristocratic in knowledge and goodness. Because
but I want to add, and I think maybe where there's a disagreement here, Jefferson does think we're equal in virtue, potentially equal. Insofar as, and he says this, we're all born equally with a moral sense in the same way we're all born with 2 eyes or 2 ears. So it's not that we all exercise our virtue equally. We all have the same equal capacity to exercise it. Many of us run afoul by bastardized thinking or whatever, or peer pressure, and don't exercise our virtue. So in a sense, what you're saying, and I agree with this, is that not all people are going to be equally virtuous because not all people will exercise their natural talent for virtue. And not everybody has the same natural talent for intelligence.
Or the natural capacity for intelligence. So you had the whole system we'll talk about next week about public education and being advanced everyone has to be educated in the basics to be a citizen, but to advance beyond that to the university, you have to excel intellectually. So as you said, Mark, he conceives, like St. Paul, in his description of the church as a body, one body, but different members. And St. Paul says, the hand cannot say, I don't need the foot. The foot cannot say, I don't need the head. We need each other. And Jefferson's view of the natural aristocracy is the leaders recognize that. They respect the lower people, and the lower people, the more common people, respect the leaders and are wise enough to select the most wise and good.
Because
now,
the leaders, in Jefferson's sense of being wise and virtuous, recognize the primus inter pares. They're the first among equals. They're stewards. They're not higher or better than the people.
Exactly. The old noblesse oblige bit, as I say, and I don't think we'll talk about this, but the chapter on the Virginia gentry, the idea of the English gentry class, and that character which he inherited as a great landowner and kind of English nobility of deference to the poor, never be rude to anyone. If you're rude to anyone, someone's superior, but you're never rude to a lower person. That's the old noblesse oblige, aristocratic attitude, which I grew up with. I grew up upper middle class, British, Anglican, and we were taught to be most polite to waiters, most polite to servants. Mm-hmm. You could only insult your boss.
Oh, gosh. Are we ready for the next question?
Yes.
Okay. The Lockean element of Thomas Jefferson's political philosophy is neatly expressed by you on page 85, where you discuss Thomas Jefferson's view of dividing and dividing again. There you note Thomas Jefferson's instance that there be strict limits to the federal government's powers.
Right. This is another adaptation of the Lockean. During the American Revolution, he takes the Lockean view of limited government and applies it to the King of England, and the free, equal, and independent view to the legislatures under the King of England. So we, the Virginia Assembly, Massachusetts, are equal to the British Parliament in that Lockean view. So the king is discriminating against us, not treating us well as the Parliament, and that justifies revolution. So once we succeed in independence, Jefferson says the federal government is supposed to protect the rights of the local governments, states, counties, wards, and most public policy should take place in that decentralized education, law, all of the domestic issues should be taking place under state and local government because we're close to the people. And when the federal government, the central government, infringes on those domestic, the federal government should take care of national defense, period. When it infringes on state and local governments in education, in law, then it's violating the social contract.
Wow.
Now, was this guy smart or what? I mean, come on.
Yes, very.
How can they say Jefferson wasn't smart?
And we need to remember that. I think, well, this is what I'm teaching. I teach this in civics, and I try to stress to my students how important it is to understand and apply it to our lives today, and what the government was intended to be, and what it ought to be, and what we should.
The key thing, and Garrett mentioned this in his book, and I think he already mentioned it, is a Jeffersonian republic or democracy, whatever you want to call it. Jeffersonian republic requires and it demands maximal participation. If it's government of and by the people, all people have to get involved, utmostly. insofar as their time and talent allows. If I'm a farmer, I can't do all that much because I don't have the same time, but I can do some things, and I need to be involved as much because it's my government.
Exactly. And I live in rural Virginia now. I live in, they call it Southwest Virginia. It's in the Appalachian Range near Kentucky and Tennessee. And this area, rural, southern, is still by culturally democratic. They know it's their county. They know it's their town. Fiercely independent Scots-Irish settlers, and jealous of their authority and don't like dictatorship at the state or especially the federal level.
Yeah, if we could only ingrain that sort of thinking in the general body of humankind in this country. That's the essence of Jeffersonian republicanism. It's this fierce independence, but also
Republicans. And there's a great saying down here. There's a lot of the language. You'd love it, Mark. It's kind of Elizabethan. It was settled by Elizabethan English, Scots-Irish English wealth. And there's a great phrase expressing that, which I, growing up in Wisconsin, had to get a whole new vocabulary. But there's a great phrase in this democratic culture that says, don't, this parents say this to their children, don't get above your rearing.
Your rearing or rear end.
Rearing. Or you're raising your culture, your background. Don't think you're better than you are. Be what you are. And don't be pretentious or prideful or arrogant. And think more of yourself than you should, because we're all citizens, common. And that democratic culture comes out in a lot of ways. When I came to this small college, it was then called Clinch Valley College of the University of Virginia. It became the University of Virginia's College at Wise. But the democratic culture of a small college was the faculty meetings of all faculty ran the college. They met once a month, everyone. And boy, were they funny. Oh, it looked like the House of Commons. They're all laughing.
Was there was a president at the time too?
Well, there was a chancellor here. They had a chancellor and a provost and a dean, and a new provost came in who I won't mention, but he said, I don't like this democracy. I don't like this mass democracy of the faculty. I want a faculty senate. So each department would elect a senator, and I can manipulate them. I can't manipulate 100 faculty members yelling at the same time.
Yeah, very John Adams. Are you ready for the next question?
Ready. Okay, you mentioned also Thomas Jefferson's second Declaration of Independence on December 24th, 1825. Few scholars mention this document. Why did Thomas Jefferson write this declaration, and for whom was it written? And by the way, we'll have to do this soon on One Work, 5 Questions, and perhaps Dr. Sheldon, you can walk us through the document when we do it. You can just dedicate a whole show to that.
Well, it's really simple, what I just said. It's not so much a document as a restatement of there's a tyranny of central government. It had become, the federal government.
That's it?
What I'm thinking of course, this is earlier, but the Alien and Sedition Acts, remember under John Adams, the Alien and Sedition Acts that basically violated the constitutional principle of freedom of speech. And Jefferson and Madison wrote the Virginia resolutions and the Kentucky resolutions. And they said the states can override this unconstitutional action of the federal government. And of course, that's why Jefferson won the election against John Adams. A government, we still have enough political culture of democracy in America, as described by Alexis de Tocqueville, freedom, democracy, rights, that if the central government actually violates a central principle like freedom of speech, like due process of law, they usually lose the next election. That's how Jefferson got back in. I mean, that's how Jefferson got in 1800, and he called it the Second American Revolution.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, he was never excited. I take him at his word. He was never excited about political activity, namely his own political activity and political offices. But I think by the time he finished as the vice president to John Adams with the High Federalist and Adams administration as cabinet, he felt it was really a duty to run for the office of presidency, even though I'm sure he didn't care to. But it was a matter of him trying to right the ship by bringing, like you said, he called it a second revolution of 1800, bringing back Republican principles to.
Yeah. And look who voted for him. He won by all those small farmers, Baptists. You know, the Second Great Awakening was going on, and the spread of Baptist churches, Methodist churches, and they saw the violation of religious freedom. And so Jefferson got in by his own common people, farmers, evangelical Christians.
Yeah, the religionists were not supposed to vote for him, and the Federalists were counting on him not winning the religionists' vote. They were telling people to put your Bibles away because he's going to collect them and burn them.
Yeah, they said, or bury them. You know, there were Puritans in New England burying their Bibles because the Federalists said he will burn your Bible. But he was for the free church, we call it in the South, Baptists, Methodists, and so on, that were evangelical, and they were afraid that the Federalists would reimpose the state church, the Church of England, the Anglican Church. They were religiously intolerant, and they were also violating due process of law, the constitutional right. If you're accused of a crime, you have the right to know what the accusation is. You have the right to know who the accuser is. You have the right to evidence. You know, this is the Bill of Rights, going back to England, and so he got the vote of common people, average people, and he did relate to them, even though he was an aristocrat. He could relate to common people.
Yeah, that's a separate story. I mean, there's a sense in which he was always an aristocrat by his mannerisms and action, his breeding, his upbringing, but he knew how to speak to the heart of the average person.
Well, look at that. Look at that chapter on the Virginia gentry. That ethos.
In your book.
In my book, that ethos of the Christian gentleman or the landed gentry. There's a great story about his grandson. He was president. Jefferson was president. They're riding their horses from Washington down to Monticello. There was a raging river and people couldn't get across it.
Mm-hmm.
And a poor man let several horses pass him. Then he asked Thomas Jefferson, "Would you take me across the river, sir?" And Jefferson said yes. And he put him on the back of the horse and took him across the river. The next person said, "Do you realize you just rode on the back of the president's horse? What made you choose him?" And he said he was the only one who looked like he would do it.
Yeah. There's so many stories like that about him.
He had a gentleman's ethos. He was kind, especially to the poor and lowly, and they recognized that.
Wow.
But he was, for all intents and purposes, as I fish things out, he was a very gentle man. And I don't mean a gentleman, but a gentleman, really not prone to anger at all. I think there are only a couple instances, 2 or 3 instances, where people talk about him getting enraged, and one involved the river incident as well. But
yeah, you might know what this language means, Mark. But I remember reading, he was speaking at a hearing in Congress, and a Federalist chair of the committee hated him and described. Apparently, Jefferson was sort of leaning back, reclining, and very casual and not afraid. And the Federalist chair of the committee told someone he has a loose and shackling air. Now, what does that mean?
A loose and shackling air.
Loose and shackling. He's just casual, confident, calm, and that was the Southern gentleman. You didn't show fear. You didn't, you were at peace with yourself. You weren't afraid of authority. And that committee chairman didn't like that. He wanted you to be afraid of his authority.
Oh.
Part of that, too, comes with, as it were, knowing your onions. Highly intelligent man who could speak on just about any subject of relevance to human living. When you are that intelligent, you know so much, it is sort of easy to be sort of loose like that, as you say.
Right. Confident.
Okay, let's get to the last question here, Donna. We've got, what, about 4 minutes or so?
No, we have 3 minutes. Finally, you claim at the book's end that Thomas Jefferson's political theory is an original and distinctly American political theory. That is a strong claim. Can you explain?
Yeah, I could quote Mr. Jefferson. He wrote somebody after the Constitution and the New Republic. He quoted King Solomon. King Solomon in Proverbs said, "There's nothing new under the sun." And Jefferson said, "This is new. The American Republic is new."
Yes. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in my book, Disease of Liberty, that's essentially the point I'm making. It is new. And he called it an experiment, or a great experiment, because he didn't even know if it would work. And as I've said, it may be that Jefferson was overly optimistic about the nature of humans and the goodness of human beings.
He was very naive, and Madison often had to bring him down to earth because Madison was a Calvinist.
Yeah.
And he knew about the reality of human sin and evil. And Jefferson really was an idealist.
That's what
I call him a grounded idealist. And what I say, if you're going to be off, it's better to be off by being overly optimistic than being overly pessimistic.
Absolutely. Err on the side of optimism.
Yes. People like Jefferson can get me out of bed so that I can write about him. I would have a difficult time writing a book on Madison. I know you did. You have those features, those Madisonian features, I guess you can relate.
So did I.
Yeah.
So did I, but he was a realist. He was what we call a realist. Madison, unlike Jefferson, the reason he set up a system of checks and balances, or ambition against ambition, is he knew you could never do away with lust for power, lust for wealth, domination. So Jefferson's idea, well, you just educate people and make sure they're economically independent and participate in politics, may be a little naive.
But he does have that one comment, maybe we can end on this, at the end of one of his queries. He said, the people at some point when they start making a lot of money, I don't know if you remember this, might have been the one on religion, and they'll start forgetting about their rights. It's a very sour, very dour comment to end one of his queries with by an optimistic person. And so I mean, he did. If he was an optimist, you can't say he wasn't grounded. Mm-hmm. He did understand some of the problems with his views. Why call it experiment?
Yes.
All right. Well, Garrett, we're going to do this again next week. Donna, take us home real fast.
Thank you so much. Next week, we looked at Dr.